Since its creation in 1857, the Victoria Cross has served as the highest award for bravery in the British Armed Forces. Over its life, 1,358 have been awarded. 628 of these were during the 4 years of the First World War. The most remarkable stories of these are the small groups you can find of recipients who all grew up in the same areas. The most famous of these is the now, of course, named Valor Road in Canada, where three recipients all came from the same street. Now, we don't have anything like that, but the city of Norwich does have three recipients of its own, all from the Great War, whose stories I shall be covering in this small series. Sidney James Day was born in 4 St Anne's Lane, just off King Street in Norwich, on the 3rd of July, 1891. He was the youngest child of Elizabeth and William Day. His father was head cellarman in Morgan's Brewery, before moving on to running a boarding and public house called the Jolly Butchers on Burr Street. He had 7 siblings, but only 4 would survive childhood. He attended St Mark's School in Lakenham, where he joined the St Mark's Company of the Church Lads Brigade. The first job he would hold is that of a butcher, starting as an apprentice for a Mr Miller, before moving on to work in St Catherine's Plain and to Saxmundham in Suffolk. Just as it did for millions, the outbreak of the First World War shattered Sidney's peaceful life, and he soon found himself on his way to enlist, to do his bit. He enlisted on the 19th of September 1914, aged 23, and by the 21st he'd been allocated to the 9th Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment in Shoreham. He would spend the next 11 months in training and drilling, ready for when his time at the front came. And come it would, although it would be almost a year after he first put on the uniform. The battalion sailed for France on the 31st of August 1915. Sidney had been appointed as acting Lance Corporal 17 days earlier. Sidney first went into action at the Battle of Loos, the biggest British attack of 1915, and was fought around the mining village of Loos and its slag heaps. Lack of artillery shells led to the British using poison gas for the first time in the war. Battle started on the 25th of September 1915, the standard bombardment followed by gas, both of which were less than successful. With large areas of the German wire still intact, British forces advanced across open fields, right into German machine gun and artillery fire. Casualties were horrific, with some even being caused by their own gas. Despite this, the German line was broken in places, and the village of Loos was captured, but poor communication, logistics, and the condition of the roads meant these hard-won gains couldn't be exploited. It was during the fighting on the second day of the battle that Sidney went to rescue a wounded officer from his platoon, Lieutenant Thomas Stevens. Sidney had gathered the man up and placed him over his shoulders, and was in the process of carrying him back to safety when they were both shot by a sniper. Lieutenant Stevens was killed, and acting Lance Corporal Day was wounded. Sidney was left in no man's land, and it would take him 3 days to make his way back to his comrades, who believed he had been killed alongside the lieutenant. The Battle of Loos would slog on until the 8th of October 1915. It was the first time Kitchener's new army, made up of the men who had volunteered at the outbreak of the war, had seen action in force, and it was nothing short of a disaster, leading to 59,247 British casualties. Among the dead was a young second lieutenant in the Irish Guards, John Kipling, the only son of famous poet and author Rudyard Kipling, whose work had inspired so many to join the ranks. Several Victoria Crosses were won in this battle, including one to a member of the Suffolk Regiment, Arthur Sanders, who was wounded but remained at his post during the action, but his is a story for another time. Sidney had survived his first action, and soon slipped into the routine of men in the Western Front. Time in the front line, time in the reserve trenches, time in the rear, repeat over and over. He was promoted to full Lance Corporal on the 1st of December. The parents of Lieutenant Stevens gave Sidney a silver cigarette case in gratitude for the bravery he had shown trying to save their son. His next large engagement would come in 1916, often known as the Year of Battles, near the river in France whose name has become largely a byword for the folly of the First World War, the Somme. It was on the 18th of September, during the latter stages of the battle that had been raging since the infamous 1st of July. 3 days earlier, tanks had been used for the first time in the war, with rather mixed results. It was during an attack on German lines that Sidney would be wounded again, shot 4 times by a burst of machine gun fire, being hit in the chest, the side, the thigh, and his buttocks. Miraculously, his life had been saved by a pack of postcards and a small book he was carrying in his breast pocket that had stopped a bullet meant for his heart, as well as a leather compass case in his trouser pocket that had taken a bullet, leaving him with a bruise to his groin, but better that than a bullet hole. A wounded Lance Corporal Day was forced to shelter in a shell hole for 12 hours till nightfall, when he crawled back to his own lines, avoiding German snipers. After a night in a field hospital, he was evacuated back to Britain the next day, where he received treatment in the Norfolk War Hospital before being moved on to recover in the Lakenham War Hospital. He remained there until March 1917, when he had made a full recovery and was transferred to the 3rd Battalion of the Suffolk Regiment on the 19th. He sailed with them back to France on the 9th of June 1917. While in France, waiting to return to the front again, he was transferred, this time to D Company of the 11th Battalion, and was promoted full corporal on the 17th of August 1917. The action that won him his Victoria Cross came just 9 days later, near Hargicourt, France, in an area known as Malencoff Farm. With his corporal stripes still freshly sewed upon his uniform, he was in command of a bombing party, clearing out a series of trenches held by German forces. After his men became pinned down by machine gun fire, he pushed forward alone. During the fight, he killed 2 machine gunners and took 4 prisoners. He then single-handedly fought and bombed his way through the trench system to link up with other troops who were attacking a section of trenches further along the line. Finding them, he returned to his section, just as a German hand grenade was thrown into the position, landing near 5 men, including 2 officers, one of whom was wounded. Corporal Day picked up the hand grenade and threw it out of the trench, where it exploded safely. He then rallied the others, pushing his men forward as they captured the trench system. Sidney established an advanced position and remained there for the next 66 hours, under heavy enemy fire from artillery, rifle, and hand grenades. His Victoria Cross was announced in the London Gazette, the official paper of record in Britain, and the paper that has carried all Victoria Cross announcements since the very beginning. His came on the 17th of October 1917 and read, "For most conspicuous bravery, Corporal Day was in command of a bombing section, east of Haycourt, France, detailed to clear a maze of trenches still held by the enemy. This he did, killing 2 and taking 4 prisoners. On reaching a point where the trench had been levelled, he went alone and bombed his way through to the left, in order to gain touch with neighbouring troops. Immediately on his return to his section, a stick bomb fell into a trench occupied by 2 officers, 1 badly wounded, and 3 other ranks. Corporal Day seized the bomb and threw it over the trench, where it immediately exploded. This prompt action undoubtedly saved the lives of those in the trench. He afterwards completed the clearing of the trench and established himself an advanced position, remained there for 66 hours at his post, which came under intense hostile shell and rifle grenade fire. Throughout the whole operations, his conduct was an inspiration to all. In December 1917, Sidney was granted leave to return to England to attend the investiture of his Victoria Cross. He received a hero's welcome when he returned to Norwich, and a large civic reception was held in his honour at the city's Guildhall. He was also invited back to his old school as a guest of honour, where he was presented with a clock, and took part in an inspection parade of the former Lads Brigade unit he had attended in Lakenham. Sidney was awarded his Victoria Cross on the 9th of January 1918 by King George V at Buckingham Palace. His was the 871st Victoria Cross awarded, and it was the second and final Victoria Cross for the First World War to be awarded to a member of the Suffolk Regiment. After spending several months in hospitals, his wounds had begun to act up during his time at home. He returned to the front line for a final time. He returned to the 11th Battalion on the 7th of April 1918, and by the 10th he was listed missing in action during the Battle of Lils during the German Spring Offensive. Sidney's fate would not be known until the 7th of June, when news came through that he was now a prisoner of war being held in central Germany. He'd been captured after being wounded, shot again, this time through the right thumb. Sidney would spend the rest of the war in German captivity until after the signing of the armistice, returning to Britain on the 23rd of December 1918, landing in Hull. Sidney was demobbed on the 19th of April 1919, determined to be a Z-class reservist. He was assessed as 30% disabled and awarded a military pension. The following year, he took part in the Victoria Cross Honour Guard at the interment of the unknown warrior in Westminster Abbey on the 11th of November 1920. As a civilian once again in Norwich, He would return to his life as a butcher, but left after a short time to begin working for the Norwich Electrical Department, totally moving out of East Anglia in the early 1930s, settling in Portsmouth, Hampshire, and by 1932 he had taken over a cafe at 12 The Arcade, Lamport, Edinburgh Road. Known at the time as the Arcade Restaurant, he renamed to the Sidney Day VC Tea Room. He would marry a Portsmouth woman, Doris Ellis, on the 21st of June 1939, and with whom he had a son born in 1943. Not all of his post-military career would be ideal. His tea rooms were destroyed on the 10th of January 1941 during a German bombing raid on Portsmouth that killed and injured 600. With his business and home destroyed, Sidney and Doris went to rent a house at 183 Kirby Road, and he soon found work again, this time working as a messenger in the Portsmouth dockyards, position he would hold until he was forced to retire in 1948 after developing tuberculosis. In his retirement, they would move a further two more times, but remained in the Portsmouth area, first to a prefab house on Penhale Road, before settling in number 18 Fraser Road by 1957. All the way through this, his neighbours would describe him as a very unassuming and quiet man. But sadly, all the time, his health was worsening, something that was not being helped by his litany of war wounds. And it was from number 18 that he would be taken into hospital for the final time 2 years later. He passed away on the 17th of July 1959, aged 68, in the Queen Alexandra Hospital, Cosham, Hampshire. He is buried in Milton Cemetery, Portsmouth. Plot R, row 11, grave 6. Doris would be buried next to him after her death on the 18th of June 1982, aged 76. Over the years, Sidney's grave was largely forgotten and fell into disrepair, as you can see at this picture of his headstone from 2004. But thankfully, with the 100 years commemoration of the First World War approaching, his resting place was cleaned up and refurbished in 2013. In his home city of Norwich, Corporal Day is remembered by a commemorative paving slab laid on the 100th anniversary of his VC action by the Norwich War Memorial that was built in 1927 to commemorate the 3,544 citizens of the city killed in the First World War. In the description below, you can find a video to a testimony from the son of Sidney Day, from the day his father was being commemorated. A campaign has also been launched for a commemorative plaque to be placed in the area that Sidney lived in the city. The house itself is now long gone, demolished in the 1930s, but I feel something in the area would still be a very nice thing to do. On the 28th of February 2018, Sidney's set of medals, consisting of his Victoria Cross, the 1914-15 Star, the British War Medal, the Victory Medal, the King George VI Coronation Medal, and the Queen Elizabeth II Coronation Medal, as well as some other personal items, were sold in an auction for £192,000 to the Lord Michael Ashcroft Collection, the world's largest collection of Victoria Crosses, and they are now on public display in the Lord Ashcroft Gallery of the Imperial War Museum. For those interested, as well as the upcoming videos on the Victoria Cross Heroes of Norwich, I have covered another recipient from Norfolk, John Osborne, known as Osborne of Hong Kong, who received his posthumously for actions taken during the Battle of Hong Kong while serving with the Canadian Army. Please follow the tab on screen for this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. All of the information and pictures used can be found in the description below. Feel free to like and subscribe if you wish. This was Norwich's Victoria Cross Heroes, Sidney James Day, and this was a little bit of history.